subject that we're taking up tonight is, of course, Parshas Balak, and we are going to learn a few insights of the Ksav Sofer, which I think are highly original and really captivating. So let's get right to it. The storyline is very well known. The Parsha begins that Balak, who was the king of Moab, or it says after his name is mentioned, he says he was the king of Moab at that time. Anyway, he's panicking. He is in a state of high anxiety because he imagines that the Jewish people have imperialistic designs against him and his people, and he sends emissaries, again, as is very well known, to Bilam. Now, take a look at the way the Torah describes his message. He says to the through the agency of his messengers, he says on chapter 22, verse 6. If you're with me in the Arts to a Chumash, it's on page 856. Balak says to Bilam, please curse this people from me. He's greater than me, more powerful. Perhaps I will be able to strike him, and I will drive him from the land. Now, again, the interesting commentary, the interesting word is lecha na ara li Yaakov. I'm sorry, ara li esa'am hazeh. The word ara, aleph resh, means to curse. I think that's how it's rendered in the art scroll. People curse this people. And then the last words in that pasuk, ki yadati asher tivarech muvarach, v'asher ta'or you are, the one you curse is cursed. So the word ara, the word you are, means to curse. But interestingly, when we turn the page and we look at pasuk Yud Aleph, so Bilam says that this is what Balak asked of me. Now the word kava, the art school people render it in the same way. Curse it for me. Kabo or kava kuf base hate means to curse. Ara also means to curse, but there's a difference between them. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says kaba li zeu kasheme arali. That is a stronger, a more potent, a more toxic term. Shehu nokev umefaresh. The word kava is related to the word nokev. Nokev is to perforate or to puncture, to specify. It's like you could say a smart bomb that hits the target unerringly will do more damage than just a general explosive that may not be directed to the precise intended target. So ara is a general form for curse. Kava is a stronger type of curse. That's what Rashi says. So Bilam, when he's describing what Balak has asked of him, he says kava. Now, Balak didn't really say kava, he said ara. But it's interesting because maybe Bilam is onto something, because when you look a few verses later, look in Pasuk Yud Zayin. So now Balak is sending further messengers, further emissaries who are more distinguished, who are more, let's say, higher ranking. And then he says in Pasuk Yud Ki kabed akabed chamaod, v'chol asher tomar elai e'esa, I will honor you greatly, and whatever you say to me, I will do. Balak is desperate. Balak is groveling now before Bilam, which is probably Bilam's plan. Now Balak uses the word kava as well. Initially he said ara now, and Bilam says kava, and now Balak also says kava, which, as we said, is a stronger language. What's going on? Why did Bilam first change it, and why did Balak also change it? Besides which, and this question I think is just at the pshat level, now that Rashi tells us that kava is a stronger expression of cursing, it's a more toxic, a more potent, a more damaging form of curse, we can understand why Bilam used it, we can understand why Balak used it as well, but why didn't Balak use it in the first place? Why is it that initially Balak said Arali and only subsequently said Kavali? So these are the questions that Sofer asks. He explains as follows. We know that because it's hinted to in a few places that Bilam was vain. Bilam was greedy, but he was also very vain. He was craving attention, craving glory, prestige. And that's why when Balak first sent him emissaries, even though actually Hashem told him he cannot go, but Bilam exploited the opportunity to say to Balak, these emissaries are not, or he told the emissaries themselves, God doesn't let me go with you, which Rashi says implies that you're not distinguished enough. It's like beneath my station to respond to the summons of Balak through you middle-ranking emissaries. You need to send nobility in order to interest me, in order to commission me. And that's exactly what Balak does. So Bilam is vain. Bilam is he's all about ego, and he's obsessed with prestige. Balak is the same way. It's actually no doubt part of human nature, but perhaps it's characteristic of that culture as well. I'm reminded of what Harry Truman once said. It's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. I think it's a very keen insight into human nature, into human motivation. But of course, Bilam and Balak care very much who gets the credit. That's how Sofer explains it as follows. He says that Balak did not want to say to Bilam, kavalioso, a strong language, a strong expression of curse, a curse that could be devastating, because Balak was concerned that if Bilam curses them, and the Jewish people are damaged or annihilated or flee as a result, everybody will say, Bilam is the hero. Bilam is the one who's the definitive player here. Balak is just the paymaster. Balak is just the one who hired him, who paid his wages. But the hero, the one who's done the deed, is Bilam, because his curse is so potent. Balak didn't want that. Balak wanted Bilam to just use a more limited form of curse so that the Jewish people would be weakened. And then, as we saw already in Pasuk Vav, Atalachani arali asa'am hazeh, then perhaps I will be able to strike him, and I will drive him from the land. In other words, Balak wanted Bilam to only restrain or to limit or to damage the Jewish people, so that he, Balak, could wage war successfully against them, drive them from the land, and then Balak gets all the accolades. That's what he wanted. But Bilam didn't go along with it. Bilam said, I want to be the one to deliver the devastating curse. Of course, in the end, it was bizyonis. It was humiliation for all of them, because he couldn't curse them at all. He ended up blessing them. But that was his intention. Sofer also quotes a pasuk in Shmuel that Shaul, who was the king, was an effective warrior, an effective general. He was the king. But King David, or the future King David, was the hero of the day, and the women would sing the praises of Shaul and say he kills his. Just reading the pasuk, he says. Shaul was jealous of David. Shaul killed thousands, but David killed tens of thousands. So rather than just bank the praise of all the minstrels that he kills thousands, he was jealous because they say about David he kills tens of thousands. Again, that's probably human nature. So says the Sofer, that's what concerned Balak, and that's why he wanted to be the one to be regarded as the hero of the peace. But Bilam did not want him to get away with it. Bilam said, he's asked me lakovovai lakachti, which we find later on, the word kava. And similarly, Balak then got the message. He's not going to agree to even cooperate on the ara basis. He wants the kava basis. So Balak had to acquiesce, had to eat humble pie and agree to Bilam's terms, kavalim. I'm reminded of something which I saw once in the name of the Chavetz Chaim, and that is that with age, many of the lusts, many of the cravings that a person has, to which a person is prone, abate with age and with advanced years. But there is one which never abates, gets only stronger with time, and that is the tava for kavod, for honor, for glory, for renown, for prestige, for legacy, that gets more intense with time. So other types of cravings, and you can imagine for yourselves which cravings a person may be to which a person may be subject. And as I said, really many of them do abate with time, but not the desire for kavod. And in a way, the desire for kavod is the most pervasive and the most, in a way, the most damaging, in the sense that a person will often bring harm to himself and his own interest in the quest for fame, renown, and a sense of winning the accolades and admiration of people around him. And that's how Ksav Sofer explains the ara and the kava, which I think is a novel and a very original insight, which to me at least has the ring of truth about it. Not that Ksav Sofer needs my endorsement, but we're learning Ksav Sofer, so I'm telling you my thoughts about it. Okay, let's take a look at another pasuk. We need to turn here to Perek Chaf Gimel, chapter 23. I'm looking at verses 9 and 10. If you're with me in the Stone Chumash, it's page 864, the last lines. So here the Torah is describing the words of Bilam, what he said as he gazed at the Jewish people in his attempt to curse them. He said as follows in verse 9, which is, by the way, in Pasuk Ches, you see, Ma'ekov lo kabo el. How can I curse when God is not cursed? Because Bilam is fixated on cursing in the stronger expression, the more potent, the more damaging, the more deleterious, and he's deeply frustrated that he's not able to do so. He said, what can I curse if God will not curse? Etc. But look at verses 9 and 10. From the mountaintops, from the hills, I will see them. Hein am levadad yishkon, a nation that dwells alone. Uvagoim lo yischashav, is not reckoned among the nations. The next pasuk says, Mimana afar Yaakov, who can count the dust of Jacob? So Rashi says about the expressions Gvaos, Rosh Tsurim and Gvaos. Rosh Tsurim is like the top of a cliff. I think it's rendered here rock-like. Okay, that's in accordance with the interpretation of the poetic language. But Tsur is a rock, like we find the word. Okay. And last week's Parasha as well. Moshe struck the rock. V'kisabat Tsur. Tsur means a rock or a boulder or a cliff. So mirosh arenu umigvaos ashurenu, and from hills do I see it. So Rashi says that this is a remez to the forebears of the Jewish people. That is to say, the patriarchs and the matriarchs. Where does Rashi say it? Yeah. Take a look at the first Rashi. I am gazing at their origins, and the beginning of their roots, that is to say, the antecedents of the Jewish people. I see they are strong, they are secure, they are firmly established. Kitsurim uvos halalu, like cliffs and mountains, alidei avos v'imahos, through the fathers and the mothers, that is to say, the patriarchs and the matriarchs. So Bilam says about the Jewish people, they are firm, they are well established, they have the merit of their distinguished and holy forebears, the patriarchs, the matriarchs. I cannot displace them. I'm unable to curse them, although I'm trying hard, but I just can't do it. There's no opportunity. Says Ksav Sofer, this observation invoking the merit of the avos imos, this is something we find very often. You could say it's a convention in the Torah and in our tefillah as well. But there's a weakness to it. The weakness is, what about Esav? What about Ishmael? So the descendants of Esav and Ishmael, who were numerous at this time, they were also descended from Abraham. They're also descended from Yitzchak, also descended from Rivka. So the Jewish people are not unique in that regard. So they have the Zchus Avos, but the clincher, says Ksav Sofer, is the reference to Miman Afar Yaakov. He says that's why Yaakov is mentioned, because Yaakov is the Bechir Shabavos. He is the, so to speak, the chosen, the select, you could say the best of the patriarchs. He represents the balance between Abraham and Yitzchak. The Jewish people alone are descended from Yaakov, and all of Yaakov's descendants comprise the Jewish people, which is not the case for Abraham, who had descendants that went all different ways. Ishmael and the other children that Abraham fathered, and even Yitzchak and Rivka, very righteous, but they produced Esav, etc. That's why there's a mention of Yaakov. Says the Ksav Sofer, and that's the reference to Hein An Levadad Yishkon, the nation that dwells alone, because the merit of Yaakov locks the Jewish people into a unique position. As I said, Abraham had other progeny, lots of them. Yitzchak also had another son in the form of Esav, who had descendants. He had plenty of wives. He must have had lots of descendants as well. Yaakov produced the Jewish people exclusively, and that's Hein Am Levadad Yishkon. But there's more to it, because he says that all of this, the praise for the Jewish people, is valid only when we are worthy descendants of Yaakov, and for that matter, Abraham and Yitzchak as well. He says that's why he emphasizes if we integrate, if we, to use the more conventional term, assimilate with the nations of the world, or even if we don't assimilate, but we effectively absorb their values and their influence, which extends to debauchery, extends to idolatry, extends to a lot of qualities which are not worthy of emulation. But if we interact with the nations of the world, then we have lost our distinctiveness, because we are no longer worthy descendants. That is to say, we're descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but we are not emulating the example of the patriarchs, especially of Yaakov. That's why he says, Hein Am Levadad Yishkon, they're not reckoned among the nations. He adds on something further, which he's quoted a few times. I mentioned in the past as well. A sharp comment of the Shla. The Shla was a Rishai Halevi Horovitz, Shnei Luchot Habrit. So he says there on the pasuk in Bechukosai, the pasuk that says, "V'zacharti esprisi Yaakov." I remember my covenant with Yaakov. I remember my covenant with Yitzchak. I remember my covenant with Abraham. So that pasuk appears within the tochacha, within the rebuke, within the verses that describe the catastrophe that will befall the Jewish people when they are unfaithful to the Torah, the suffering and the exile and the dispersal. And then towards the end, it says, I will remember my covenant with Yaakov, with Yitzchak, with Abraham. This is usually understood, and the Baal Kriya conventionally reads those couple of verses in a loud voice, whereas the rest of the Tochacha is with a low voice. It's conventionally understood as a kind of stirring of the fact that Hashem will recall the covenant, and despite the punishment that will be visited upon the Jewish people, it will not be to the point of annihilation. That's the convention. Says the Shla, it's part of the Tochacha, because the fact that we are descendants of such great people as Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that is a reason for us to be further deserving of rebuke for our failures. If we betray the legacy of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, then of course it counts against us. It's great to have a distinguished, worthy, holy, devout, righteous, saintly, wise forebears, but of course it creates a greater expectation for us. Like I've said in the past, noblesse oblige. The fact that we are descended, says Sofer, from the hilltops and the cliffs, that is a remez to the patriarchs and the matriarchs. That is all the more reason for us to be held to a demanding and an exacting standard. And if not, then we will be called to account. And therefore, says the Sofer explicitly, that the blessing of our righteous ancestors will turn chas v'shalom into a curse if we betray their legacy. So it's a double-edged sword, so to speak. I would like to add, he doesn't say this, I would like to add, the Gemara says that Bilam repeatedly blessed the Jewish people to his great frustration and equally frustration of Balak, his paymaster. But, says the Gemara, from the blessings that he gave, if we analyze them closely, we can see the curses that he wanted to bestow. So he wanted to curse them in all various ways, and Hashem did not allow him to do so, and instead he blessed them. But from the blessing that is recorded in the Torah, we can infer the curses. So I wonder if Bilam wanted to do exactly that, meaning he wanted to hold out the example of the patriarchs and to say, look, the Jewish people are unworthy descendants. They've betrayed the legacy of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and of the matriarchs as well. And that was his attempt, but it didn't work out for him because at that time the Jewish people were worthy. Of course, we know the end of the story where he came up with a plan, and that was unfortunately quite successful to harm the Jewish people. But as of this time, the Jewish people were indeed bagoyim lo yischashav. They were not mingling and were not subject to the deleterious influences of the nations of the world, and therefore they were protected from his attempts to curse them. So again, what we've seen here is that the reference to the Avraham and Yitzchak has a weakness that the descendants of Yishmael and Esau are also included, besides other descendants of Abraham as well, would also be included. That's why he mentioned specifically Yaakov, because Yaakov is unique to the Jewish people. He's the forebear of the Jewish people. But at the same time, it also brings with it an expectation and a demand. That is to say, if we fall short, then indeed we're called to account. The third comment I want to share with you is on Pasuk Chaf Aleph, same page on 866, if you're with me in the Stone Chumash, so it's chapter 23, verse 21. Lo he beat Aven beYaakov v'lo ra'a amal beYisrael. Adonai lahav imo usuras melech bo. He perceived no iniquity in Jacob, so no perversity in Israel. Hashem, his God, is with him, and the friendship of the king is in him. So Rashi says that because Hashem, like Rashi explains, Turas Melech Bo, from the word, not Teruah like a shofar blast, but from the word Reut. Reut means friendship. But Turas Melech Bo, the friendship of the king is within him. Yeah, that's how it's rounded here in the article, but the friendship of the king is in him. If you take a look at Rashi, that translation comes from Rashi. It's in the left-hand column. Usruas Melech Bo, Lashon Chiva v'Reut, an expression of affection and friendship. Kamo Reya David, the friend of David. Ohev David means the one who loves David. V'itne l'marei Ehu, another friend. So Truas Melech Bo means the friendship of the king. And that's why Rashi says, no, God did not stare, like he did not scrutinize the wrongdoing of Yaakov because he likes them so much. He has like an affinity, a natural affection for the Jewish people. Therefore, Hashem is not as demanding of them, or he overlooks some of their transgressions. I mean, there's a limit to how much Hashem will overlook, but he definitely is prepared to overlook some, because if he didn't overlook our transgressions, where would we be? In perdition, chas v'shalom. So that's what Rashi says. Lo he beat, and again, Bilam is, you could say, complaining, or at least he's pronouncing this as a bracha, that God does not scrutinize the Jewish people in such an exacting way as to highlight or condemn us for every wrong step that we may take. Says Iksav Sofer, basing this up on the Rambam. There's an interesting passage, important passage in the Rambam in Hilchos Gerushin, where the Rambam says that if a man is married and he mistreats his wife, and he is required by the courts to free her with a get and to pay the ksuba as well that he owes her, and he's a scoundrel, or maybe he loves her, or maybe he doesn't love her, but he doesn't want to divorce her, perhaps he doesn't want to part with the money, he refuses. He is someone who is resisting the ruling of the Beis Din, and he refuses. Such a thing is not unknown, as I'm sure you are aware. So in the good old days, and not so easy to do nowadays, they had a case in New York some years ago where a certain rabbi apparently was trying to put into effect this teaching of the Rambam. The civil authorities did not take kindly to it. But according to what it says in the Rambam, the halacha is makin oso ad sheyomar rotze ani. They coerce him, and they threaten him, and they even administer lashes or other forms of corporal persuasion until he says, I'll do it. I can't take the pressure. I can't take the pain. I don't want to suffer any more blows from the bailiff of the court. I will give the get. Now, the problem with that is, I mean, besides the fact that at a human level, it's a tragic scenario, but halachically, the get has to be given with out of his own free will. If he does so under coercion, then the get could be invalid. So the Rambam says a fascinating idea, that really the person wants to do what's right. He really wants to conform with the instruction of the Beis Din, because that reflects the Torah law, and he wants to fulfill the law of the Torah. But he's got a Yetzer Hara, which everyone has. This person, his Yetzer Hara, either because of malice, or because of ego, or because of any other combination of reasons, his Yetzer Hara is overwhelming him, and therefore he refuses to give the get. When we beat him, so we're beating the Yetzer Hara. The court is effectively like weakening the ability of the Yetzer Hara to prevent him from doing what he deep down really wants to do. And eventually, he may well acquiesce, and then he gives the get, and he does so willingly, in the sense that his true intent now comes to fruition, and the impediment posed by his Yetzer Hara is diminished, and is essentially weakened or beaten into submission. We could say that's what the Rambam writes. What's the supposition of the Rambam? The presumption here is that every person deep within him wants to do what's right. That's what it says. Usruas Melech Bo. He quotes the passage we saw in the Ksava Kabbalah. For those who were with us, I can't remember when it was, even last year or the year before. I think it was last year. Ksava Kabbalah says, quotes a pasuk, Turo'eim b'shevet barzel, which means shatter them with an iron rod. It doesn't mean shattering the person. It just is the word Turu'ah also means to shatter. Usruas Melech Bo, says Iksav Sofer, it means that the king may bring about suffering upon the Jewish people, and by so doing, they will. The Jewish people will do tshuva. Now, it doesn't necessarily work that way every time, but that's how Iksav Sofer understands it. So again, Bilam says Hashem doesn't see any wrongdoing in Yaakov, etc., because although they do wrong, it's only the influence of the Yetzer Hara. But deep within every Jew is the desire to do the will of Hashem, and there can be accretions which make it quite difficult to accomplish that, or even to recognize the spark within him. I'd just like to end with a story I heard from my friend Rabbi Yaakov Asher Sinclair. You can find it online if you want to see I didn't actually watch the whole video, but I watched the first part of it. I'm sure you can find it online. His name is Yaakov Asher Sinclair. He is from St. John's Wood. He lives in Jerusalem now. He teaches in one of the yeshivas there in Or Sameach. And he gave a talk recently about his autobiographical account, how he became religious. And he started with the following. He has a background in show business. He worked as a producer, a music producer in Hollywood for a number of years. Comes from a very talented family. And, the family talents ran more to business, show business, more so than rabbinics. Well, he's become a very successful rabbi and a Talmid Chacham. So he was relating how he got to be where he is. And I'm just going to tell you the part of it which is pertinent to our thoughts right now. I'll be very brief. He said that about 30 years ago, he was standing in Ben Gurion Airport, and he was dressed in the conventional attire of a Haredi young man, and which he was a young man at that time. And he presented to the whether the security person or the gate, the ticketing agent, his passport, his British passport, which showed a picture of a man who was at that time a music producer in Hollywood. He was clean shaven, had a little mustache, and he had a very self-satisfied look on his face, which he modeled for us. I'm not going to try to do that. You can see it on the video if you like. And the woman looked at the picture, looked at him, looked at the picture, looked at him, and she could see it was the same person, but he looked a lot different. So she looked at me, she said, Makara, what happened? So he said he looked back at her, and he said he didn't know much Yiddish in those days, but he knew two words that Yiddish. He said, Pintele Yid. She didn't understand that. She said, Ma? So he said, Nitzotz Yehudi, the Jewish spark. That deep within that Hollywood music producer who was living the Hollywood lifestyle and all the trappings that go with it was a Pintele Yid, which came to the fore. You can hear the rest of the account from him. You can find it online, I'm sure. Yaakov Asher Sinclair. Yeah, John Sinclair was his name. He said that in the lecture as well, that she looked John Sinclair, and he didn't have that look about him any longer. So the point is that there is within every person, every Jew, sometimes deeply buried, that Pintele Yid. So we've seen from Ksav Sofer today, as we like to summarize, just to review, we said Ara and Kava. Ara is a lighter term. Kava is more toxic. Balak did not want Bilam to be the hero and get all the glory. He wanted Bilam to weaken the Jewish people so that Balak, could defeat them, and everybody would say, wow, Balak is a great warrior, he's a great general, he's defeated the Jewish people. He didn't want Bilam to have all of the glory, and this was a, let's say, refutation or represents the contrary view to Harry Truman's observation. It's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit, but they cared very much who gets the credit. We say Mirosh Tzurim, Gvaos refers to the patriarchs and the matriarchs. That's why there's a mention of Yaakov as well, because Yaakov is the one who is the ancestor of the Jewish people exclusively, but the Jewish people stand to gain from our descent from Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov only when we are worthy descendants, when we emulate their ways. If we betray their ways, it only comes back to haunt us. And on the contrary, we are invoking curses rather than blessing. And then finally, just now we said the idea of about that Truas Melech Bo, the rebuke of the king is within him, within the Jewish people. But because Hashem realizes that ultimately we are only subject to the Yetzer Hara, but deep within every Jew there is a spark of a belief and conviction. And therefore, Hashem, so to speak, overlooks some of our transgressions because he knows that ultimately we would like to do his will. Thank you very much. I wish you a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rabbi Simon.
Thank you.
Shabbos, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shabbos.
Everyone.
Good Shabbos.
I
Good Shabbos.
question, when he says that we're not dealt with for every little thing, is that individual or is that Klal Yisrael?
It's probably both. It's probably both. I mean, Rashi says, it doesn't mean that a person or the Jewish people collectively that our wrongdoing is overlooked, but we are not held to scrupulous margin of error. That is to say, no margin of error every time. Of course, someone who's very righteous, very great, will be held to a higher standard. But that's what Rashi said. That's how Sofer explains it, because ultimately a person wants to do what's right, but a person has possibly indulged his Yetzer Hara over the course of many years, and therefore the Yetzer Hara has become accustomed to ruling over him. But ultimately a person can get in touch with the inner spark which every person carries within him. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
That
you.